Is Stephanie real?
Who told you that name? How did you know that name?
Doesn't matter who told me. What matters is whether it's true.
I think this marriage can continue. I want a divorce.
That is not possible, my daughter. How will you say you want a divorce? What will people say?
My mind is made up, Mommy.
I'm not abandoning you, Ify. It's temporary. Is Stephanie temporary too? The silence that followed was the longest one yet. And in it, Ifeoma watched her husband's face do something she hadn't seen before. Not guilt, not panic, something closer to irritation. As though the inconvenient part of this conversation wasn't the lie. It was that she'd found out. Who told you that name? Chuka said quietly. It doesn't matter who told me, Ifeoma said. What matters is whether it's true. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Day 18, the family got involved. Ifeoma had told her mother on day 17 that she wanted a divorce, just that. No details yet, no Stephanie, no 100 million naira, nothing she couldn't take back. Just, Mommy, I don't think this marriage can continue. By day 18, both families had gathered at Chuka's parents' house in Magodo. An emergency meeting, the kind Nigerian families convene with terrifying speed when a marriage is 18 days old and already in trouble, and the kind that operates almost without exception on a single shared assumption that the wife's unhappiness is a problem to be managed, not a verdict to be respected. Ifeoma, my dear, Chuka's mother said, in the gentle, devastating tone of an older woman who has clearly given this speech before to other women in other living rooms. Marriage is not always easy in the beginning, Ifeoma. Every marriage has its adjustment period. You think your own mother and father didn't have issues in their first year? This isn't an adjustment period, Ma. He has another wife. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. And in it, Ifeoma watched her husband's face do something she hadn't seen before. Not guilt, not panic, something closer to irritation. As though the inconvenient part of this conversation wasn't the lie. It was that she'd found out. Who told you that name? Chuka said quietly. It doesn't matter who told me, Ifeoma said. What matters is whether it's true. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Even so, Chuka's father spoke for the first time. An older man, quiet until now, and his voice carried the particular authority of someone used to being the final word in a room. Even if everything you say is true, a divorce this fast, this publicly, it benefits no one. Chuka has commitments abroad, important ones. What if, and I'm only suggesting this as an option, Ifeoma, what if you simply allow him to go quietly? He continues his life there. You continue here with our full support, financially, every month, no question. And in time, when things are calmer, we revisit. No divorce, no scandal. Everyone keeps their dignity. Ifeoma looked around the room at Chuka, who hadn't said a single word in his defense for 50 minutes. At her own father, who was looking at his hands. At her mother, whose grip on her hand had not loosened. You're asking me, Ifeoma said slowly, to stay legally married to a man with another wife, a man who is about to fly back to that wife, so that I don't have to deal with people talking, so that his travel plans aren't inconvenienced, and in exchange, I get a monthly allowance and the privilege of telling everyone I'm a happily married woman while my husband lives an entire life on another continent I'm not allowed to be part of? When you say it like that, that's the only way to say it. Ma, sir, I have been very patient for 18 days. I have listened to every explanation. I have sat in this room for a while, and everyone has discussed my marriage like I'm not the one married. And I want to be very clear so that nobody in this house misunderstands me later. She stood up. I am filing for divorce tomorrow. And Chuka, she turned to him. He looked up, finally, and for one moment, Ifeoma saw something close to fear in his face. The first honest expression she'd seen from him in 18 days. You should call Stephanie tonight before I do. Day 20, Chuka changed. He froze the joint account, the one Ifeoma actually had access to, 4 million naira that represented almost all the cash Ifeoma had to her name after quitting her job. He told his lawyer, he had a lawyer already on day 20, which told Ifeoma everything about how long this had actually been planned, that Ifeoma had married him for travel purposes and was manufacturing claims to extract a settlement. He called Ifeoma's former manager, the woman who had organized the goodbye lunch, and told her falsely that Ifeoma had asked him to explain why she might not be available for future opportunities. A story so transparently designed to humiliate Ifeoma professionally that her former manager called Ifeoma directly, confused, asking what on earth was going on. He told 3 different WhatsApp groups within the same evening, 3 different versions of events. In one, Ifeoma had always been unstable. In another, she tried to trap him for money from the start. In the third, sent to his mother's church group, he didn't mention Ifeoma by name at all, only referenced a difficult situation and asked for prayers in a way that managed to make himself sound like the victim of something he had in fact caused. This was, Ifeoma understood, a messy divorce, not an argument, a demolition, fast, deliberate, designed to leave Ifeoma with no money, no reputation, and no version of events except his. Day 21, Ifeoma made one call. Not to a lawyer, though she had one by now, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Barrister Adeze, who Ifeoma's cousin had recommended on day 19, the moment the word lawyer had come up in Chuka's camp. Not to her mother, who had already cried more in 3 days than Ifeoma had ever seen her cry in 29 years. She called Stephanie. She'd found her. It hadn't been hard in the end, just a name and a city and 40 minutes on social media. And she sent a one message in English, careful and direct, with no accusations and no drama, because Ifeoma had learned in 21 days that drama was Chuka's weapon, and the only weapon he didn't have an answer for was the truth, delivered calmly to the one person who could end his life on 2 continents with a single phone call to the right office. Hello, Stephanie. My name is Ifeoma. I think you and I both have been married to the same man, and I don't think either of us knew about the other until very recently. I have a Nigerian marriage certificate dated 3 weeks ago. I'm not writing to cause trouble for you. I think we're both owed the truth, and I think you deserve to decide what to do with it. I'll leave that entirely up to you. She attached a photo of the certificate, and then she put her phone down, and for the first time in 21 days, she slept for 9 hours straight. Day 22. The papers were signed. Not the divorce papers. Those would take months, Barrister Adeze had explained. Nigerian divorce proceedings don't move in days, regardless of what anyone in Chuka's family had implied to frighten Ifeoma into compliance. What was signed on day 22 in a lawyer's office in Ikeja was a formal separation agreement drafted overnight after a call Ifeoma received at 6 a.m. that morning from a number she didn't recognize. It was Chuka's father. Stephanie called the house, he said, without preamble, his voice tight in a way Ifeoma had never heard from him. She's filing something with the Canadian authorities about Chuka's residency, about multiple marriages. I see, Ifeoma said. Ifeoma, whatever you send her, if you can stop this, if you can call her back and tell her it was a misunderstanding. I didn't send her anything that wasn't true, Ifeoma said, and I'm not calling her back. That's between the two of you. The two of you and Chuka and whatever explanation he has left. Because from where I'm sitting, sir, he's run out of new ones. By noon, Chuka's lawyer had withdrawn every claim. By 2, the frozen account was unfrozen, and an additional sum was transferred into Ifeoma's account with a memo line that read only "full and final." By 4, Ifeoma sat across from Barrister Adeze in Ikeja and signed a separation agreement that gave her the flat in Lekki outright in her name. The flat someone had furnished for a different bride 3 months before Ifeoma had even known she existed.
By 6, Chuka was on a flight to Toronto, not for a visa renewal interview, but because Stephanie had reported him to the authorities and he has to pay for him crimes, one that had nothing to do with Ifeoma at all, and everything to do with 22 days of a marriage he'd never intended to keep. 22 days. That was the entire length of it. From the morning Ifeoma walked down an aisle in a dress she'd chosen herself, to the evening she stood alone in a flat she now legally owned, holding a phone with a single new message on it, from a contact she hadn't saved a name for yet. It was from Stephanie. "Thank you for telling me the truth. I'm sorry it cost you so much to do it. For what it's worth, I think you're going to be fine. I think you already know that." Ifeoma read it twice. Then she opened her laptop for the first time in 22 days and began drafting an email to her old manager, the one who'd kept her seat warm, the one who'd called confused about Chuka's strange story 2 days earlier. "Hi, sorry for the silence. A lot has happened and I'll explain when I see you. But I wanted to ask, is that seat still warm?" A woman should never be made to feel that her silence is the price of her dignity, or that protecting a man's reputation is more important than protecting her own life. Families who ask a woman to endure a marriage built on lies are not asking her to be strong, they are asking her to disappear quietly so that everyone else's comfort can remain undisturbed. What people will say is not a reason to stay. It is very often the exact reason people stay too long. And the truth, calm, documented, undramatic, is the most powerful thing a woman in Ifeoma's position can hold, not as a weapon to destroy, but as a key to walk out the door that was never really locked, except by the fear of what waited on the other side of it. 22 days was all it took to build this marriage on a lie, and 22 days was all it took for the truth to take it apart, because the truth, once it starts moving, does not need permission to keep going. 8 months after the ink dried on her separation agreement, Ifeola Nwosu sat in the front row of a business conference in Lagos, listening to her own name being read out as a finalist for Young Entrepreneur of the Year, and thought with a small private smile about how strange it was that the worst 22 days of her life had somehow become the best 8 months of her life. It hadn't happened by accident, none of it. Day 23, the day after the separation agreement, Ifeoma had not cried, slept in, or disappeared to find herself on a beach somewhere, the way the aunties who'd pitied her at the family meeting probably imagined. She had opened her laptop at 9 a.m. and emailed her old manager. By day 30, she was back at the bank, not in her old seat, but in a better one, because in the 6 years she'd worked there, she'd quietly built a reputation that an 18-day marriage hadn't managed to erase, no matter how many WhatsApp groups Chuka had used to try and put her down. But the bank job was never the plan, it was the bridge. Ifeoma had kept the flat in Lekki, the one furnished ironically with someone else's taste, paid for with someone else's secret money, signed over to her outright as part of full and final. For the first 2 months, she lived in it the way you live in a hotel room you don't quite trust. And then on a Tuesday evening in month 3, sitting alone in a living room she'd never chosen the curtains for, Ifeoma did something that surprised her almost as much as it would later surprise everyone else. She started a podcast. Not about Chuka, not at first, and never by name. Ifeoma was too careful, too deliberate to ever give him the dignity of being identifiable. She called it Married for 22 Days, a title that within the first week had every woman in her comment section asking the same question. What happened in those 22 days? She never told the full story on the show. That restraint, Barrister Adeza's advice, and good advice, was in the end the thing that made it explode. Instead, episode by episode, Ifeoma talked about everything around it, the financial questions women are taught not to ask before marriage, how to protect a career before resigning for a man, what it actually means when a family says, endure it for the sake of peace, how to read a bank statement, how to find a lawyer before you need one, not after. By month 5, Married for 22 Days had 400,000 listeners. And by month 7, a financial literacy platform had offered Ifeoma a paid partnership to turn the podcast into a course, Pre-Marriage Money Conversations, aimed at women exactly like the one Ifeoma had been on her wedding night, posting a photo of a hotel lobby with absolutely no idea what was 3 doors down the hall. She quit the bank in month 7, not in anger, in confidence, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. And somewhere in Toronto, a man named Chuka Obi was finding out in the worst possible way that the woman he'd told his family wouldn't be that bold had been quietly, calmly becoming the most talked about voice on Nigerian Twitter for women going through exactly what he'd put her through. He found out specifically on a Thursday, and the way he found out was the first piece of Ifeoma's revenge that she hadn't even had to plan. His mother sent it to him. A clip from Married for 22 Days, episode 41, How to Read a Marriage Contract Before You Sign It, Financial Edition, had been shared without context in the same church WhatsApp group Chuka had once used to call Ifeoma unstable. Someone in the group had recognized her voice, and within 2 days, half of Magodo knew exactly whose marriage the podcast with the suspiciously specific title was probably about. And unlike Chuka's 3 different stories from 8 months earlier, this time around, nobody needed Ifeoma to confirm anything. The numbers spoke for themselves, the dates spoke for themselves, and Stephanie, who Ifeoma had not spoken to since that final message, but who it turned out followed the podcast under a name Ifeoma didn't recognize, left a single comment on episode 41 that read, "I know exactly which 22 days this is. Good for her." Chuka's life in Toronto, Ifeoma later learned through channels she never asked to be told through, had not survived the Stephanie situation either. The full and final payments that had landed in Ifeoma's account on day 22 had come from somewhere, and that somewhere was the same 100 million naira account Ifeoma had once seen open on a laptop screen. Chuka's mother's family land savings, it turned out, weren't entirely her mother's. Stephanie's lawyers, once they'd started looking, had found that out too. By the time the podcast clip reached Magodo, Chuka had already lost his job, a contract role tied to his residency status, which had quietly not been renewed after certain disclosures, and was, according to the same channels Ifeoma never asked to be told through, living in a small apartment in Mississauga, alone, while Stephanie's divorce proceedings against him moved through a Canadian court with considerably less patience than a Nigerian one. He sent the first message in month 9. "Ify, I know I have no right. I just need you to know I think about those 22 days every single day. I was a coward and I destroyed something that could have been good. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know I'm sorry. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed to say I'm sorry." Ifeoma read it on a Sunday morning standing in the kitchen of the Lekki flat. Her flat now. Repainted, recurtained, no longer furnished with anyone's taste but her own, and felt to her genuine surprise, almost nothing at all. She didn't reply. The second message came 2 weeks later. Longer, more desperate. Details about Mississauga, about the divorce, about how Stephanie had taken almost everything, about how he'd had time finally to really think, about how he knew Ifeoma had moved on and built something amazing. I've seen it. Everyone has seen it. And how he wasn't asking her to take him back. Of course not. He just wanted to know if there was any chance someday of even being friends, of her forgiving him. Because, and this was the line that made Ifeoma actually laugh out loud alone in her kitchen, "I think we both need that closure."
Ifeoma sat with that sentence for a long time. And then she did something that 11 months earlier, the version of her standing in a hotel hallway at 2 in the morning would never have believed she was capable of. She replied, one message, the only one she would ever send him again. "Chuka, I want to be very clear, because I think you spent 11 months constructing a story where this ends with me telling you it's okay, so you can feel lighter about what you did. I'm not going to do that. Not because I'm still angry. I'm not, actually. And that's the part I don't think you're going to like. I'm not angry. I'm finished. There's a difference. Forgiveness in the way you mean it, the kind that gives you permission to stop thinking about it, that's not mine to give you, and it never was. That's between you and whatever you do with the rest of your life. My life isn't a chapter in yours anymore, and it isn't going to become one again so you can have an ending that feels better. I hope you figure yourself out, Chuka. I really do. Just not with me and not because of me. Please don't message me again. She didn't wait for a reply. She blocked the number before she'd even put the phone down, and then, because it was a Sunday morning and the light coming through her own curtains in her own flat was particularly beautiful that day, she made coffee, opened her laptop, and recorded episode 53 of Married for 22 Days, titled simply Unforgiveness and Why You Don't Owe It to Anyone. She never mentioned the message. She didn't need to. The episode, recorded an hour after she'd sent the most final words she would ever say to her ex-husband, became, without her planning it, without her even realizing it until the numbers came in, the most downloaded episode the podcast had ever had. The conference where Ifeoma was named a finalist for Young Entrepreneur of the Year took place 14 months after the divorce was finalized. She didn't win. Second place to a woman who'd built a logistics startup, which Ifeoma thought was a genuinely better business than hers, and said so warmly to the woman's face afterwards, because Ifeoma had learned somewhere in the last year that generosity cost nothing when you weren't performing for anyone. It was at the after-event reception, a rooftop space in Victoria Island, the kind of evening where everyone is mildly exhausted and the conversations get more honest because of it, that a man named Tunde introduced himself. Not because he recognized her from the podcast. He didn't, he admitted later sheepishly, that he didn't really do podcasts, but because he'd noticed across the room that she was the only person at the reception who looked like she was actually enjoying the view instead of networking at it. Everyone's looking at their phones or at each other, he said, nodding at the skyline. You're the only one looking at the actual city. It's a nice city, Ifeoma said. Most people forget to check. They talked for 40 minutes about nothing important, which was, Ifeoma realized afterwards, exactly why it had been so easy. Tunde ran a small architecture firm. He asked about her business with genuine curiosity and no agenda she could detect. He didn't ask why she wasn't married, or mention that she must be so busy for a woman her age, or do any of the dozen small things Ifeoma had quietly learned in the last year to notice and catalogue in men within the first 10 minutes of meeting them. At the end of the evening, he asked for her number the way Chuka never had, not as a foregone conclusion, but as a question he seemed genuinely uncertain of the answer to. Ifeoma gave it to him. And as she rode home that night, looking out at the same skyline Tunde had pointed out an hour earlier, she thought about the woman who had stood in a hotel corridor 14 months ago in her nightgown, following the sound of her own ringtone towards a door that wasn't hers. And she thought with something that felt less than triumph and more like quiet, settled peace, that the woman in the corridor would never have believed this evening was possible. Not the business, not the podcast, not the flat with curtains she had actually chosen, and especially not the part where 14 months later, the worst thing that had ever happened to her had become, barely, almost invisibly, the way most important things do, the very thing that taught her how to recognize immediately, easily, without a single doubt, the difference between a man who saw her and a man who simply needed her to be there. Ifeoma didn't win by destroying Chuka. She won by becoming someone his apology couldn't reach, and the life she built afterwards, the podcast, the business, the curtains, the rooftop conversation with a man who asked questions instead of making assumptions, wasn't her moving on from him, it was her moving on, period. He simply wasn't invited.